Yeah. Oh, Walter, thank you so much for your time. It's a genuine honor to get the chance to have a chat with you. To celebrate, I mean, to celebrate many things. The conversation is our diving off point because of the anniversary and this wonderful opportunity that people are going to have to see at the cinema. But it also gives us the opportunity to celebrate a little bit more of your work as well, if that's okay. What do you talk to me a little bit about when you think about the conversation and that project that you worked on? What are the things that kind of fly into your head as memories of that experience?
Um, well, it's 50 years ago. So that's half a century. Um, Strangely, it coincided with the beginning of research into digital sound, which was happening at the same time. And I remember when reading the script before the shooting,
Mm.
um, there's the key scene in early in the film is when Gene Hackman, the Harry Call character, is able to uh, tune out some music and hear some dialogue in essence behind the music. And knowing what I knew about sound at that time, I said that's impossible using analog, but
Mm.
it is remotely conceivable that in digital sound, which hadn't been practiced yet, it could be done. So I I allowed myself to think that Harry Call somehow had gotten to digital sound before anyone else had, and that when he plugs in his little secret filters, that those are somehow digital.
Yeah.
And what that did was open up um, a whole idea of how his microphones work, uh, and that um, brought along the idea that if something is not perfectly recorded on axis, so to speak, that it gets digitally distorted. So I had to come up with the sound of digital distortion. Um, and
Wow.
that works its way into the whole fabric of the soundtrack of the film. So here we are 50 years
50 years
later.
later.
And in fact, just last year that they did exactly that, eliminating some guitar sounds so that we could hear John Lennon's
Leonard,
voice.
yeah, for the Beatles track, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Peter Jackson and his wizards down in in New Zealand, yeah, doing their
yeah,
magic. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, exactly.
It must be I mean, you're someone who's such a polymath with regards to your creativity and how interested you are in different elements of filmmaking, whether it is editing or writing or directing or sound. I mean, I believe you coined the phrase a sound designer as well, because, when you were starting out, that wasn't really,
Right.
it wasn't a role. It wasn't, it wasn't a credit for a sound designer, but it's something that you really celebrated and brought to the forefront of filmmaking in terms of how important sound and the relationship it has with so
Right.
many other elements of filmmaking were.
Yeah. I mean, we were all film students 55 years ago, 60 years ago. And students are always fighting the fact that they don't have enough money. And what we realized, and by we, I mean me and George Lucas and Francis Coppola, was that if you had a pound and you spent it on some interesting sound, you got more back than you would if you spent it on visual, because visuals are very expensive. They still are. Whereas sound, you can do something very simple and it can have a huge effect on an audience. And so it was a way of kind of adding to the power of the films without uh, breaking the budget.
Yeah.
and then we just took off from there.
Well, the conversation is such an interesting kind of visceral experience as an audience member, and that you feel like you're doing the eavesdropping too, in the way that the sound design works in that film. You know, you feel like you're in those vehicles, kind of listening to the conversations, and and that's what's so great about how that was kind of designed
Yeah.
as well, that immersive experience almost in a way.
Yeah, but and because it's about somebody who does that, the Gene Hackman character is a sound recordist, and the whole film is told from his point of view.
Mm,
Every shot is either looking at him or looking at something that he is looking at. In other words, you never go off with two other characters and do something else. So you're trapped in Harry Call's world, and his world is the world of sound because that's what he does. And the whole premise of the film turns on what's going to happen to him as a result of these recordings.
mm.
So you can't escape it, really. You have to get into that headspace. And that was, when Francis asked me to edit the picture on Conversation, which I'd edited some small documentaries and some commercials, but I haven't edited a feature before.
Wow.
He said, "Well, you're a sound man, and he is, so you know him, so it'll all work out."
Did he, I mean, did you feel the same about Apocalypse Now then as well? Because talk about the sound of a film being so important to the experience of as you know, as a film fan and being in that world.
Yeah, the key there is, I mean, in Francis's mind, that Vietnam was the helicopter war. Helicopters have been used in the Korean War, but they really were used in Vietnam. And when you think about a helicopter, naturally, you think that it it can circle around you, and that led to the idea of developing this new format, which we call 5.1 today. Back then it didn't have a name, but we wanted the film to have a unique new kind of sound envelope for it, and that arose out of many things, but primarily the idea of helicopters.
With the collaboration, you know, with Francis just on those two films alone, you know, and with Apocalypse Now, the music with on that side of things, and also David Shar's score on the Conversation as well. How involved did you get with, you know, in that side of things, and you know, because that's, you know, with Apocalypse Now, the way that music's used in that film, I feel like it's a real benchmark in terms of where then people, I don't know, the courage then that people felt they could have and how they use music, you know, exist in music, needle drops within film.
Yeah, the breakthrough on Conversation was that Francis asked David to write the music before the film had been shot.
Oh, wow.
And David said, "Are you crazy? I shoot the film." And Francis countered and said, "No, you, David, have written music for Broadway shows, and you write the music based on the libretto,
Script.
so to
Yeah.
speak. So just, I've given you the script, now write the music for it." And so he did. He wrote, I think, 4 or 5 themes, which he played on the piano. And they were just mood pieces. And David gave them to me. Um, so I had them, and then Francis had them, and Francis would experiment with playing those pieces of music for the actors before shooting a certain scene. So the actors kind of would have in their head some idea of what the music would sound like. And that freed them. Um, if in essence they could say to themselves, well, if the music's going to do that, then I don't have to go there as an actor. I can do something over here. So you develop a kind of contrapuntal relationship already, right from the beginning. And then as I edited the film, I just treated those pieces of music as temp music, which they were temporary, and I'd experiment putting them here and putting them there. And at a certain point, I would then send that juxtaposition to David, and then he would get ideas from that, and we would jump back and forth as the film developed. And at the end of it, I thought, well, this is clearly the right way to do it. All films must work this way. But of course, I found out that that wasn't true.
Do you remember what the conversations were with David about, was it purely based on the script, or did Francis and yourself have any idea of instrumentation or melodies or tempo or anything, or would you just leave it up to David and his interpretation of the script?
I mean, they decided, just for efficiency's sake, those early cues were piano only.
Yeah.
And we heard them, we thought, and Francis thought, well, yes, he's kind of a lonely single guy. The single piano is good for that because it's a single instrument, but it's a complex instrument, and that works with the thematic development of the character.
And what about Apocalypse Now, with those those iconic tracks that are now so associated with the film and the visuals of it, in terms of, there's definitely the case of where you now hear those pieces of music that were used in there, both classical, both, kind of music of the time, the era, that as soon as you hear them, you think of those images, you think of that film.
Right. I mean, like the Doors?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Doors and the Rolling Stones, that was baked in. Also the Valkyries.
Yeah.
Was baked in. Valkyries was in the screenplay by John Milius. Francis had the idea of using Jim Morrison and the Doors because he'd gone to school with Jim at film school at UCLA. They were not friends, but they knew each other.
Yeah.
And the Rolling Stones was just something that Francis decided to see if we could get the rights to it, and we did. So.
And how is it having something? It's a strange question, but when there's something that has an existing life, as a piece of art, as a piece of music, and you're using it within a film, and you're editing around that and knowing what elements of it to use and where and how to use it. Is that do you almost have to try and eliminate the past life of the tune in a way, or so?
I don't quite get the question.
Well, with those existing pieces of music, they have a connection with people already. They'll have an emotional attachment to that Doors track or to the Stones and stuff. And so I guess if you're using something that's already existing in a film, and because I love that idea that you said about editing is it's a psychological practice with the goal of anticipating and controlling the thoughts of the audience. So you're kind of you can't think about how people might feel about those pieces of music in terms of how you use them in your film. You've got to have your own attachment to them for those characters, for that story, I guess.
Yeah, it's I mean, the Valkyries is a good example, I guess, because the legend is that Valkyries was used in Birth of a Nation in 1915 by D.W. Griffith for the charge of the Ku Klux Klan. So it was one of Hitler's favorite pieces of music, and so it has a whole very complex, slightly grisly backstory to it.
Yeah.
And all of that is working when you hear it. And that, why did the Robert Duvall character, Kilgore, why did he choose that piece of music? Because that's the kind of person he was. So all of those, and then it became famous because of Apocalypse Now. And now, it's almost, every time somebody wants to conjure up Vietnam and helicopters, they play that piece of music.
Yeah,
So that other layer on top of it.
absolutely. Um, I hope you don't mind just talking a couple of minutes as well about your wonderful work with Anthony Minghella on The English Patient and Talented Mr. Ripley as well. And I was just reminded of Ripley recently from watching the beautiful and very different TV show that was recently made and stuff. But
TV show. So,
it's beautiful and it's a completely different beast
right.
for on lots of levels. But both those films have such a presence and such a beautiful, again, sort of sensual experience as a as a viewer when you're sitting in the cinema watching them, the kind of the colors and the sound design of Ripley, you feel the heat almost of from Italy and those some of those scenes and the way that it's been made. But do you mind talking a little bit about working with Anthony and what that was like, as a collaborator with him on those two films?
Yeah, it's Anthony and Francis, I guess, because they're both Italian. There was a similarity there in that both of them very much encourage the participation of all the other people working on the film, so that there's an embrace of the process. We're all one big family, and who has a good idea here? Of course, they have their own ideas going into it, but they other contributions. And because I'm working, I have a dual role. I'm both editing the picture, but also working with the sound, ultimately with the sound.
Yeah.
Uh, it that has a double aspect to it. The Gabriel Yared is the composer for all of Anthony's films, and we wound up working very similarly to the way David had worked, in that Gabriel would write music based on having the script and
Hmm.
having some work print, just seeing some fragments. He would come up with musical ideas. And then Anthony and I would place them against the film, and that would give Gabrielle more ideas. And again, back and forth, rather than the more industrial way of working, which is that you lock the film, you finish the editing of the film, and then you give it to a composer, and the composer adds music to a pre-existing structure.
Hmm.
This What I'm describing is that the music comes in much earlier and helps to build the structure of the film itself, and vice versa. The structure of the film helps the music get written, and vice versa. And it's the best way to work. The technic the logistical problem with that is that it's very time consuming. And usually composers are so busy that they say, I can give you 3 weeks in March. And so the whole film turns around that availability. But
Yeah.
in the case of David Shire on Conversation and Gabrielle Yared, that wasn't the case. They dedicated themselves to the film.
Um, I wanted to ask as well, just quickly about when there's the opportunity to have different cuts of a film, when it may well be that there's the decision to be made to make a director's cut or down the line for an anniversary, with Apocalypse Now as an example, with um, I mean, different versions of that film. Is that a joy to be able to dive back into that world and I don't know, grow it or what are you reacting to, I guess, in a way?
So say the last part again.
What are you reacting to? What are those decisions based on in terms of how you re-edit something or,
Yeah, I mean I worked on Apocalypse Redux,
Yeah.
which was a big uh, increase in the running length of the film. I think we added 50 minutes
Wow.
at least to the film, which made it 3 hours and 20 minutes. It's kind of the same length as Godfather 2, I think.
Yeah.
Uh,
Which we haven't even mentioned yet. Oh my God. Sorry, Walter. Godfather 2, we haven't even mentioned. I can't believe I haven't mentioned that yet. Sorry. Anyway, back to the editing of that Apocalypse. We'll get to that in a sec.
yeah, and that grew out of it was something that grew from a relatively small seed, which was the death of the French actor Christian Marcon, who played the paterfamilias of the rubber plantation in Vietnam.
Mm.
That the original film was cut completely out, and but he died, and I think
Wow. That's so
uh,
lovely.
the French producers said, "Can we recreate that scene in honor of him and make it a DVD extra?" So we simply launched the whole project to Canal Plus wanting to have something, a memorial for Christian Marcon. But once you do that, then, we're ordering negative, which has been stored for 20 years in limestone caves in Pennsylvania, and
Wow.
bringing it out to San Francisco. And well, as long as we're doing that, Francis said, why don't we look at other things? And so it began to grow, uh, and it became much more than just a series of DVD extras. The whole film. Um, that Redux is pretty close to the screenplay that Francis set out to make
Yeah.
in,
Wow.
in 77, 76, 77.
Wow. That's incredible. What a beautiful tribute, in terms of to give someone that's I didn't know that story. It's absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sharing it with us. Um, Godfather Part Two. I mean,
I worked on all.
all of them, yeah. But what's lovely as well is that you know, your involvement grew as well over those films, didn't it? As well, in terms of from one to two. But I don't really know what to ask you about them because I feel like it would be cheating the world by just asking you a flippant question about working on the Godfather films because they're such an important part of cinematic history. But do you get the chance to give yourself to think about or to reflect on, for you personally, what you got out of working on those films when you see the response that they still have with the world, with film fans, and how
Hmm.
they're still revered so much?
Yeah, just on a personal level, we were working in San Francisco. We were not in Hollywood, but Godfather definitely was a Hollywood film. It was the first time that I had worked at a studio. Uh,
Mm.
I did a bunch of work in San Francisco on the soundtrack. But then at a certain point, we had to move everything down to Los Angeles. And so I found myself at Paramount for the first time, behind the studio gates,
Yeah.
uh, dealing with Bob Evans and Al Ruddy and, all of the fantastic characters that were roaming around at the time.
What's your in terms of those films as well, and when they, when you see people talking about, lists of the best films ever made, and they constantly, you know, appear in those lists of things. What was it about those collection of characters and that particular story and how it was told, do you think that still continues to make an impact on people?
The Godfather films, or
Yeah, the Godfather films, yeah.
Uh, it, I don't know, it happened to strike a chord. It's a fairy tale. Once upon a time, there was a king who had four sons. Um, and one by one, each of them died, leaving ultimately just Michael.
Mm.
But it has a fairy tale operatic aspect to it, and yet it's also infused with detail about what an Italian family and an American Italian family is like, which Francis was able to draw from his own experience.
Yeah.
Which is ultimately why he was cast, because Paramount had made a previous film called The Brotherhood with Kirk Douglas, and it had not succeeded. And Evans, who is Jewish, said, the problem with The Brotherhood is that we were all Jews. So let's make one with just Italians, and maybe that'll strike a chord.
And
So
that extended as well through to Nina Rota, with the score as well, and the kind of authenticity of
yeah,
of
Evans hated Nino Rota's music,
what?
and that was a struggle to get him to accept that music, because the look of Godfather at the time for people was very dark. They hadn't seen the studio, hadn't seen stuff like that. Gordy Willis, the cinematographer, and it was European in sensibility, they felt. And when the music came in, it was more of this Italian European sensibility. Again, this is what Evans felt, and he thought he wanted relief from that. He wanted some punchy American gangster movie. So he thought that the best thing would be to throw out Nino Rota's score and hire Henry Mancini to write a whole new score for it. And luckily, we were able to persist. I guess Francis threatened to take his name off the film and everything. And there was a big meeting to finally decide whether we would go with Mancini or not up at Evans's house. He was married to Ali McGraw at the time.
Oh, wow.
And finally, Francis did one of his amazing numbers for 20 minutes of just, saying threats and everything.
Yeah, passion.
Defense of the music. And Evans said, okay, all right, so we'll stick with Nino, but we'll preview the film with your recut of Nino's music, and then I will recut Nino's music, and we'll preview that, and we'll go with whatever scores better. And there were some studio executives at that meeting who completely turned white because we were 6 weeks away from release, and there was no way that we could do that kind of work. So Evans was saying, all right, who will go first? And it was clear whoever went first would get that version.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Just then Ali McGraw came in with a plate full of hot dogs, and she said, oh, don't forget, Bob, we're going to Acapulco on vacation. And he said, you're right. So he said, okay, Francis, you go first. And I looked at Francis and he looked at me, and we thought, okay, we've got this.
Yeah.
And on the drive back to the studio, Francis said, well, good luck, Walter. I said, what do you mean? He said, no, I'm going back to San Francisco. I have a play to direct. He was directing Private Lives at ACT.
Oh.
So suddenly I was in the hot seat. And I thought, know your enemy. Well, try to think like Bob Evans for a moment. And the scene that I thought of was the scene where Waltz discovers the horse's head. And what Nino and Francis had done with that music was play against the horror. It was kind of a carousel type music. And I thought, well, maybe that's gone a little too far. So I did some fancy things with the editing to make it more dissonant.
Mm-hmm.
We went back to the mixing room and put up all the tracks and called Evans in. And he had a bad back at the time. There was a hospital bed in the mixing studio. He lay down on the bed. We played the scene. It was suitably more horrible because of this dissonance. And he jumped out of the bed and said, "Give me a phone." And he grabbed a telephone and walked up to the screen, dialing the phone. And he got Charlie Bluedorn, who was the head of everything of Gulf and Western, which owned Paramount. He said, "Listen to this, Charlie." And he held the phone up to the screen. And we were with Dick Portman sitting in the back, looking at Bob Evans, the head of Paramount, holding a telephone up to the screen, casting a shadow on the screen. And on the screen was the head of another studio, discovering a horse's head in it. And I can't imagine what it sounded like without seeing the picture over the telephone. But I guess Bluedorn felt that Evans was happy. And so Evans hung up the phone and said, "Great work, keep it up." And we never heard from him again about the music. So,
Wow. Well, that's an extraordinary story. Thank you for sharing that. Wow. Um, Listen, we've run out of time, Walter. I just want to say as well, just been lovely talking to you about a number of films and in particular obviously this beautiful relationship with Francis, and I feel completely honored that I was just in Cannes and got to watch Megalopolis with the audience and see his response to that as well. And I just
so I can't.
yeah. Yeah, I am. But it was just it was an honor to be in the same room as the man. Do you know what I mean? Just to kind of to feel his energy and his enthusiasm for his craft. And it's been an absolute joy to get to talk to you and celebrate just a smidgen of your work, but just your enthusiasm for for your work and your crafts is infectious.
Very good.
Thanks so much for your time, Walter. Great to chat to you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.